beginning Thursday at 12 and 5 at the John Barry. The good
Yep.
folks at the Trust, Natasha, I'm sure you may know her, and Maddie, and certainly Jonathan. There's a new person there, Sarah, and they organized with the Park Service to
Hmm.
have us there. Many of us are Twilight tour guides. Several of us are members of the APT,
Hmm.
and we'll be stationed there at 12 for about an hour and at 5 for about an hour to talk to many of the visitors, certainly about John Barry and naval history, marine history. So anything you want to share with us, we
Sure.
appreciate.
No, that's fine. And we'll keep this kind of loose. I'm sure some of you guys know Greg Irwin, professor over at Temple. And I had gone to see him lecture on, actually did Arnhem Bridge, Market Garden project. And he had said to me, I tell the students to interrupt anytime because you want them to ask the question when they have it in front of them. So let's go for a conversation and feel free to interrupt with any questions. And hopefully we'll have plenty of time afterwards for this. Um, what can I say about this guy? I was introduced to him at the statue you're going to be at when I was 4 years old, taken by my dad, who was head of neurology and pathology at the veterinary school, but loved history. And when I asked him what Barry was painting for or pointing at, he, instead of saying can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Instead of saying he's pointing at the enemy ships in the distance or pointing the path of the Delaware that leads down to Wildwood where we go for vacation, being a pathologist, he said, he's saying, I'm buried over there, and then took me to my first cemetery. Uh, I've been really blessed with doing the research for this. I found his papers. Uh, it's kind of a sidebar a little bit because I was on the board of the Kearsley Retirement Community, which had been founded by Ben Franklin's doctor, John Kearsley, who I'm sure most of you know. And I later found out his nephew was an unmitigated Tory and wound up dying in jail because they intercepted a letter he wrote to General Gage after Lexington and Concord saying, if you get 5,000 troops down here, I'll make a loyalist militia of 5,000 and we'll hold Philadelphia. And uh, so that I was looking for, we were going through bankruptcy issues with a lawyer, Pepper Hamilton. And I learned that the Barry papers were at the Seaport Museum and a real treasure trove and just a really terrific, and everybody there was so kind. And that's where I learned about it's Historical Society of Pennsylvania, New York Historical Society, the Public Library, Library of Congress, anywhere I went, including Haverford, which has several of Sarah Barry's letters to John, which are really wonderful. But the nuts and bolts of it, here's a man who was born during the age of the penal laws in Catholic Ireland, where you could not speak Gaelic, you couldn't celebrate Mass. They had lessened a little bit that Irish Catholic children could go to school till about third grade, and then it's time for them to go to work. His dad was a tenant farmer, similar to a sharecropper. He's farming, but he doesn't own his farm. And he had an uncle Nicholas who somehow the penal laws forgot to own the ownings of ships. So while he couldn't own the goods that he sent back and forth, probably to Spain and across the channel, he did make a nice living as a captain. So the choices young John had were three. He could uh, join the group of other Irish young men that left to fight in what became known as the Wild Geese as uh, as soldiers of fortune. He could become a farmer like his father and deal with his dad's issues, but he was basically sent by his parents to go to Uncle Nicholas and learn how to be a sailor. And he was so good at it that he uh, came over about 15 years old as a sailor, and he had a relative who lived in Philadelphia. And I couldn't find any research that tied did he stay with her or what went on there. But he immediately got work as a sailor. He was rather big for his age. He was 6'4", So he was one of the few people that could barely look down at George Washington at 6'2". But by 21 or 20, he was got his first captaincy for a small schooner called the Barbados, and a crew of 5. And its owner, Edward Denny, had made a living selling enslaved persons. And he made so much money they could get out of the slave business and buy his own schooner. And so this is how Barry got started. He had a first wife, Mary Cleary, who sadly we really don't know anything about, except that she died while he was at sea on a voyage in the 1760s. And his next ship, then he sold the Barbados out from under him. And a merchant and a grocer and a merchant joined with him to buy a ship they renamed the Industry to stand for them being able to, make it on their own. And he had some decent voyages, some bad luck voyages. He then went to work for a couple of the other merchant captains until by 1774, Robert Morris, who was already the richest man in the colonies, picked him for this brand new ship he had built, and the finest one yet built in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Black Prince. And he made 2 voyages from her in 1774 and 75. On his return voyage from the second one, by then Lexington and Concord had happened. When he returned on the first voyage, he found the waterfront in the Sea of Turmoil. They had just learned about Lexington and Concord, and the merchants were in the process of those who owned ships getting all their goods in as fast as they can. Those who didn't own ships begging their colleagues, if you got room in your hold, I've got some furniture, I have some, barrels, I have some clothing. And literally people being jostled off the walkways. They were in such a hurry. So he immediately went back with the Black Prince before she was refitted, had her refitted in England. On his return home on September 11th of 77, he and his crew took advantage of a gale and sailed 237 miles in a 24-hour period, which doesn't sound like much to us. That's like driving round trip to Brooklyn and back. But in that day and age, no one's found an entry of that long a set of miles on any other ship. So it's considered the fastest sailing day, at least in Western civilization history. When he came back, it was in the middle of the debates about having a navy. And fellow Stephen Hopkins was in charge of helping form the Marine Committee and his picks, which ironically were headed up by his brother Isak, a son, a friend in Providence, and then a New Englander, Saltonstall, and Nicholas Biddle. One of the people I approached to be a captain of the sloop Providence turned it down because he'd never sailed a fore and aft rig vessel. That fellow was John Paul Jones, so he reported to Biddle. And they got underway. Barry was in charge of refitting these ships to turn them into warships. So the bulwarks were being pierced, the gunnels were being pierced for room for guns. They had to stiffen the rails and everything else in terms of fighting, and get them off to sea. And he wasn't quite happy with the task, but that was the job he got and was given permit, so went and did it. In March, the Americans captured a brigantine, which was named the Wild Duck, and they refitted her. Barry refitted her, and they gave her the command of it, and that's the Lexington.
Okay.
Which is, I'm sure some of you know, on his first voyage down to Virginia, he encountered a tender, the British sloop Edward, from one of the British squadrons. And they fought a battle that lasted about half the afternoon. And when it was done, the British struck their colors. And Barry sent the Edward flying the colors upside down back to Philadelphia, while he went to Barnegat and Absecon to get his own ship refitted. So John Adams wrote to his wife, Captain Barry of Philadelphia has made this great capture. He served on the Lexington through into the fall. The most had another cruise that captured, but the thing he's most famous for Lexington is Turtle Gut Inlet. Have you guys know about that?
Why don't you tell it? Because I didn't know about
Okay.
it.
Well, at the end of June, a merchantman, the Nancy, came up from the Bahamas with her hold loaded with half barrels of gunpowder. So Barry and Richard Weeks, who was the commander of the ship Reprisal, and sloop of war Wasp went down to intercept her off the Cape May. Barry had already started vexing a lot of the British captains, including one fellow, Andrew Snape Hayman, who looks like the quintessential captain. I'll try to send you guys the PowerPoint I use, because it's got a picture of a photo of the log with the 237 miles, and Andrew Snape Hayman. That would have been a perfect part for Christopher Plummer to play. And he writes to the Admiralty, it is difficult for me to capture this Philadelphian Captain Barry, as he knows all the shoals and inlets. I have chased him into sea, but he always seems to elude it. He would literally play cat and mouse and draw him to the shoals, hoping that he would run aground. And, there were enough loyal captains or pilots to help him not get into that. Anyway, on the 29th, Barry and the other two ships weighed anchor around the Cape and took rowboats up to Wildwood Crest. There's a marker at Stetson Avenue where the lake is, if any of you know Wildwood Crest, because that's where Turtle Gut Inlet was. And the Nancy had run up along shore. So they were in the process of unloading the barrels on their ships or their rowboats as fast as they could, because two British warships, the Liverpool and the Orpheus, came up and started pounding the hell out of the Nancy, which only had one gun. Some of the sailors were fighting back with rifles once there came boarding. Two ships unloaded boarding parties and they were repelled. But soon the fight got so hot that Barry said, we can't stay here. There were about 150 so half barrels left in the hold. And Barry and the captain of the Nancy, Montgomery, took a sail and turned it into a fuse. They filled it with gunpowder, and then they put some gunpowder in the captain's cabin and the rest in the hold up where near the forecastle, and ran it. They lit the sail in the middle and then jumped overboard. The Nancy exploded just as the second British boarding parties boarded her. And the Pennsylvania Gazette says that the explosion could be heard 40 miles from Philadelphia. And the only American who lost his life was Lambert Weeks' brother, Richard, who is buried near Cold Spring Harbor. There's a marker, but the historians there say we're not sure there's his remains under that. 5 days later, Congress declared independence from Great Britain. He was given a command of a brand new frigate, the Effingham, and a lot of these were built by Joshua Humphreys, who you guys all know. And Humphreys had already been disowned by the Quakers for building ships of war. And there was another ship, the Washington, and being built at the same time. After the loss of the Battle of Brandywine and then Germantown, Washington gave orders through the head of the Marine Committee, our friend Francis Hopkinson, who I'm sure many of you are well aware of. He was as my Irish American grandfather from Baltimore would say, he was well over 4 feet. Had quite an attitude. It was rather condescending to people below him, such as Barry, and kind of a suck up, for lack of a better term, to the Washingtons and John Hancocks of the world. So he ordered these two ships to be sunk in the Delaware up near Whitehall. And Barry and the other captain refused. And they just said, we've got our guns. Let them come up. We'll turn sideways and we'll give them the fight of their lives. And if things go bad, then we'll blow the ships up or we'll sink them. And Hopkinson was adamant. He wanted those ships sunk. And Barry was furious about it. So Hopkinson said, I'll do it himself. Hopkinson's a maritime lawyer. So he knows the maritime law like nobody's business. But if you're going to do it, bring this up in the tours, the one thing Hopkinson didn't pay attention to was the tide table, because he supervised the sinking of the ships, which means sailors went below and hammered out the plugs to get things started when the tide was going out and not going in. So instead of turning into the deep water, they're heading towards the shallows. And Barry's on board, and Hopkinson, he says, you didn't tell me, why didn't you tell me about this? And Barry probably said something like, you didn't ask. So the whole thing reads like a verse, something in Caddyshack. It's that kind of crazy. The only thing missing is Rodney Dangerfield and Ted Knight. But Barry almost loses his captaincy over this. Hopkinson says, you will lose your commission. And Barry's so upset, he goes to visit his wife first and then the Valley Forge. A word about Barry's second wife, Sarah Austin. Her brother William Austin and his family owned the Art Street Ferry. This is like owning SEPTA, and I mean that in a good way. You know, if you need to get anywhere, back then, I got to go to New Jersey, well, you take the ferry. And while Sarah had not, had just married Barry, they got married at Christ Church on July 7th, 1777. They called that year the Year of the Hangman. And I'll leave it to you gentlemen and you ladies what to do with this. But on the ultimate day of the hangman, 7/7/77, Barry gets married again. And William is an arch loyalist. They have a younger brother, Isaac, who went with Barry to fight at the Battle of Princeton. Barry took his sailors along with a couple other Continental Navy captains. And Barry was an aide to General Cadwalader. So he saw some pretty good action that morning and day. The Howes are now in Philadelphia. And they go to William Austin, he's the go-to guy, and say, we're making you responsible to make sure that the Patriots don't try to burn the city down before we get our troops and ships up here. And he takes care of that. Sarah's half-sister dies in childbirth. The lady already has 7 children. So now Sarah Barry and Isaac Austin, and now Sarah's 8 stepchildren go to the summer home in Reading. So Barry goes to tell her what's happened and complain, God, look at all this stuff. And I'm sure Sarah tried very nicely to say, you want to go one-on-one with what we're dealing with here? Take a look. And he then goes to Washington and gets there the same day Washington gets there from White Marsh. And he tells Washington what happened. He tells Robert Morris, who's there, what happened. Morris says, when Congress goes back in session, leave it to me. We'll take care of this. But he tells Washington that he would eventually like to get some row galleys that have been left up above Whitehall and Bordentown and slip past the British at night on the Delaware in the dead of winter and see what mayhem he can do. And in the discussion with Congress, whether or not Barry should be left as a captain or not, as only Congress can put it, the vote passed in the negative, which means it was a tie. So Barry immediately runs back up to Whitehall. He's able to get 2 of the rowboats. And in a cold night in February, they slip past Philadelphia and wind up over in Jersey and then in Wilmington and the Delaware banks. A captain like John Paul Jones was his own best press agent. He wrote poems. He even wrote a poem about himself. He wrote a poem to Phyllis Wheatley when he was in Boston because he heard that she was a poetess. Would have talked about the bitter cold and the howling winds whistling through the ships and the riggings while we slipped on muffled oars past. You could see the moonlight on the sentries' bayonets and so forth. Barry writes, past Philadelphia in 2 small boats. This is who he is. The Navy historians, when I first started working with this, their nickname for him was Silent John. So he winds up running into Anthony Wayne, who is in Washington, Jersey, to try to rustle up some cattle for the troops at Valley Forge. So Barry says, sign us up. We'll be glad to give you a hand. Within a half hour, they realize that getting cows on these rowboats, by now he's got 4 row galleys, is not an easy thing to do. And the British have spotted them. Captain Hayman is in charge of the Navy, and now he sends British, rowboats and et cetera, off to capture the rebels. So Barry and Wayne decide to do something that sounds like it came out of a Western. Wayne takes the cattle, a couple hundred head north, to cross at Burlington. Barry rows his boats down along the Jersey coastline, and they stop every so often when they see the farmlands that have any haystacks baled up and set fire to them. So they keep following him until dark, and then he slips back over to Wilmington. A few days after that, am I going too fast, guys?
No, you're fine.
A few days after that, he takes the row galleys out. There's 2 transports and a schooner coming up, and further down, it's foggy and it's looking like it's about to snow. He can see a frigate and a ship of the line that can't get up, in time. He captures the transports and the schooner, which he renames the Alert. Among his prizes are the engineering tools of John Montreser, who is now Cornwallis's chief engineer, but as most of you know, he's the fellow who designed Fort Mifflin. So Barry gets to immediately sends the engineering tools over to Valley Forge. They get intercepted. Probably what happened was the same guys he sent for the escorts going, hey, I can use this. Can you use this? Can we have these? So Montreser's tools disappear in Delaware, and we never knew who all got them or where they are. Even probably a garage in Claymont, Delaware. Like, why did great grandpa keep this? But he intends. Go ahead,
Tim. Did those cattle wind up at Valley Forge?
Yes. So there was beef on the hook after, and this was in early, in February. So
February of 78.
February of 78, and the March of 78. So
if
Barry
anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand on the screen.
Like I said,
use the screen tool to raise your hand.
Yeah, and is that a hand raise from David?
Yes.
It is.
I want to ask you a question. The ships that they took up to Bordentown and they had to scuttle. I had a friend who was just an amateur marine archaeologist, I guess. He would help out on digs.
Yeah.
He told me that they took ships up to somebody. This is what I'm asking. Well, I don't know. The Barry ships, it was, I just read your book. It was heartbreaking to him. He had to scuttle them up there. But my friend said that there were some ships that were taken up there and they were sunk, and then they were refloated with animal skin balloons or something to refloat them. Is there any truth to that?
I don't know that one. I know that of all people, Benedict Arnold used animal skin balloons up in Connecticut to get a frigate to Trumbull. Was literally landlocked. It couldn't get out of to the river from the lake. So he just said, take all the cannons off, take everything off, and and floated it over, and the Trumbull got to sea. There was other British or American ships, and a couple of them were part of the First Fleet, that also when they came up, they were sent, and if you read the book, the crew set them on fire. So it was like several
Right.
Viking funerals heading up to get out of British hands. But I don't
Do
recall
any of
that
those ships, exist though that they scuttle? Can I go up to Bordentown and see them from the shoreline
there
or?
was a dear gentleman, and let's see, do I have a Barry book here? There was a dear gentleman in the a couple people referred me to who knew the area, and he also worked for Bell Telephone. So he had all of this equipment, but they had found the keelson of a ship. It wasn't near enough, big enough to be a frigate, but it could have been anything from a transport to a sloop to maybe what was left of a brigantine. But 2/3 of it was left, and you could walk in the marsh grass and see the whole thing. It was really pretty neat.
Okay.
Kathy has a question.
Yes. Yeah, Kathy.
You're on mute, Nat, Kathy.
I was intrigued by your statement about animal skin balloons. I'm trying to figure out how you could get a balloon out of that, but I do know that many Native American tribes use the bladders of
Yes,
animals
that's what they
as
were.
balloons. And
They're
that's what you're
goats
talking
in.
about.
Yes.
It's the inners, not the outers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All
It's
right.
the
Thank you.
bladders.
That makes much more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Jim,
But can you imagine how many of them you needed to move
Oh,
a
yeah. They
frigate
would have needed
like
a lot.
Benedict Arnold did? I mean, everybody's going, "Where's our herd of goats?" Like
Right. Okay.
Jim has a question.
Tim, when you were talking about Turtle Gut Inlet, if I remember correctly, you ended the story with something to the effect that pieces of 11 British Navy men floated gently into the sea. Is that
well,
correct?
actually, they crashed. They found, I mean, there were cockades, there were arms and legs, there was pieces, obviously, of the ship, but all intermingled that fell back into the water. And there was a palpable. What's so interesting about these times is that when you read the logs of the British or the marine reports of the British captains at Total Gut Inlet, at Flamborough Head, anywhere, and you read the American accounts, you could interchange them and not change the story one bit. They might use a different adjective. They might use 2 sentences instead of 1 or a paragraph instead of 3. But the story is exactly as told by the one side as the other. Can you imagine that in today's world?
No.
I mean, it's one of those little asides. I don't know how many of these things you guys are looking for, but that struck me, particularly when we did John Paul Jones and the Bonhomme Richard and the Serapis, that Captain Pearson and Captain Jones's were interconnected. They were exactly the same story. Nobody snowed anybody.
Was Turtle Gut Sunset Lake? You said lake. Was it Sunset Lake in Wildwood
It's
Crest?
it's the lake in the back in the crest, right
Yes.
down back from Ocean Avenue and Pacific, and then got that great lake. And I'm trying to remember is it Dunphy's? There used to be a big restaurant there, began with a D.
It's gone. It's gone because my
Yeah.
parents, when I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, had 2 houses on Farragut. Well, there's another naval name,
Yeah.
Farragut Avenue, and Duffy's was at the end of no Duffy's has been turned into condos or townhouses.
Yes, it's a shame. We
But-
actually bought a rental property in 2001 on Hollywood Avenue. And all my life, not to drop, my grandfather was a 3rd grade dropout born in Baltimore at 20. He was a piano player and a band leader. At 21, he was in Philadelphia and he eloped with my 17-year-old grandmother in Chicago when they came back. But my grandfather played, can you go back to Lou Booth's nightclub on 19th and Surf? Then Mickey
No.
Shaughnessy had it and he called it Club 18.
No.
When we get done this story, if there's
Yes.
time, remind me to tell you this one because it's
Okay.
amazing. But I grew up in North Wildwood and it always cracked me up. Oh, we're in the Crest, oh, no, we're in the Crest. And I finally asked my dad, what's the big deal with Wildwood Crest? And he said, Broomall, where Uncle Ed and Aunt Nell live? I said, yes. And he goes, you know the cemetery there? And I said, yes, it's St. Peter and Paul's. And he goes, well, Wildwood Crest is just like Broomall. It's a lot of Cape Cods and split levels, but instead of the ocean, they've got St. Peter and Paul Cemetery. So that was how my childhood description of Welcome to Wildwood Crest. But
Well,
yeah,
I'm wearing my Wildwood Pizza favorite shirt
yes.
right now.
Wait a
Thanks.
minute. Oh, shoot. Where's Mike?
Right here.
Uh, can we get, I hate to be nasty to David, but
Oh,
you know,
don't
if
tell
he
me
was
Sam's. Don't tell me Sam's.
absolutely, pal, absolutely.
No,
Sam's is
stop.
much
All right.
better.
I'm cutting. No, I'm leaving.
Okay.
There.
Any other, anyone wants to break this tie, come and join in anytime.
I was weaned on this and birch beer from
Well-
1961.
Well, at least that we have in common. What else can you have with pizza besides birch beer and the boardwalk?
Yes.
But Sam's was this little thing with the window and it's all black inside and the pizza was 20 cents instead of 25. But now, as you know, it's this emporium and it's, you go there for the pizza, but also for the entertainment. I love watching these people who are, you know, slightly larger than the town itself that walk in with curly fries and
I think we're
uh,
digressing way far from John Barry. Can we get
Yes,
back
we
to
are.
him?
Yeah,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
pizza's religion.
Yeah. Okay. Meanwhile, so Barry has sent the tools to hopefully to Washington, and he has anchored the transports. Aboard the transports were three British ladies, officers of British or wives of British officers who Barry immediately saw got to, you know, back to Philadelphia. But he's got the schooner, and now the experiment ship of the line and the Broom the accompanying ship are coming up, and it's easy for them to have Port Penn and Reedy Island in range. The battle starts and a nor'easter has sprung up. Barry takes time to write another letter to Washington and said, along with this letter, we've sent the tools. I also send you this cheese and this jar of pickled oysters, which crave your acceptance. Then he went back out to get in the fight. They did their best. Our guys did their best, but eventually he took the unmoored the Alert, got her off, and then, but he wound up having to leave her in the shallows and get his men back to the Wilmington, you know, the Delaware shoreline. The captain of the experiment was James Wallace, who was right up there with Bannister Tarleton. If you want to talk about villains, before the revolution started, he was bombarding and burning homes in Rhode Island. And when he learned that this was Captain Barry, he tucked that away. Later in 78, Barry went up to Boston, took command of the frigate Raleigh. And by then, the Continental Navy had such a difficult time recruiting sailors. Initially, they had said to their men as recruiting, you know, we're gonna give you 50% of the profit, or we're gonna, you know, I'm sure get great profits. But they didn't tell them that Congress took 50% and then they were getting 50%, so much less than they thought. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy, anything that was captured, Parliament and the Crown just said, split it up between the officers and the crew. So that did very little to, and they also were not getting paid anywhere close to regularly. So most of them signed on to privateers. You had,
How much impressment went on the Continental Navy? Or any, they were against it. Wasn't Barry against forced?
he was, but he used it. And I will be getting to that because he had
Okay.
to use it with the alliance. But he was so shorthanded leaving Boston with the Raleigh in the fall of late summer, early fall of 78, that he was forced to take his Marines, British soldiers captured at Saratoga. And he no sooner got away from the coastline than he was pounced on by another frigate and a ship of the line. And the ship of the line, of course, is captained by James Wallace, who knows from British spies, this is the same guy that dissed you on the Delaware. So he pursues him until dark, and Barry goes quite a few nautical miles further and then figures he's probably left to go after somebody else. So Barry changes course and heads south. And within 2 hours, there's Wallace waiting for him. They have a very, not a long running battle, but they get to a point where he's off the Penobscot coast. There are many little islands, and the second broadside takes down his mainmast. So now he's stuck. He can't go anywhere. So they keep up the fight well into the evening hours. And when he finally realizes this isn't going to work, he decides to have the crew abandon ship and head to one of the islands. It's called Wooden Ball. Interesting name for an island. And Barry goes with the second group, but tells the third one and leaves a midshipman, set fire to the ship before you leave. And the midshipman loses his nerve. So those men are captured, and Barry's left on Wooden Ball Island pacing back and forth. What happened? What happened? So they get back to the coast of Maine and make it overland back to Boston. So he does a report about the loss of his ship. And there's some historians that say that the court of inquiry for him was a whitewash, that had he been a lesser regarded captain, he probably would have lost his commission or just not been given another command. But he'd already done such great things that they started, oh, let him go and we'll see. He did take command of a privateer in Philadelphia called the Delaware, because there was no, in 79, he had no command. John Paul Jones would not serve as a commander on a privateer, but most of the other Continental captains did if they were without a Continental ship, and Barry was one of them. He loved the fact that he and his men were paid immediately after their 2 cruises. There's a good John Wayne type story about him coming up the Delaware when a brand new Continental frigate, the Alliance, is heading downstream. And the captain, fires a warning shot because he wants to impress Barry's crew. He's shorthanded as they'd all been. And Barry keeps going. So he fires a warning shot over the bow, and Barry keeps going. He fires another one, and Barry takes its trumpet horn. And, what ship is this? And Captain replies, Continental ship Confederacy, Seth Harding, captain. And he's already got the boats heading over. And Barry says, Captain Harding, I would advise you to turn your boats around. My name is John Barry, and you're not getting a man from us. And he's already told the men, look, don't lose your cool yet, because some of them were probably deserters from the Continental Navy. And some of them were probably crooks that were escaping Philadelphia. And he says, don't get upset. If they come, we'll be ready for them. And he has them, get, the brickbats and the back end of a musket and, tools and everything else to defend themselves. Harding sails south without the crew. Barry, during that time, Barry's wife converts to Catholicism. Here's one that might be getting into a minefield, and Jim and you guys, I'll leave it to you whether you want to discuss it. A priest tutors her in becoming a Catholic. She has an enslaved woman, Jude, Jude, and the enslaved woman is converted to a Catholic by the priest's enslaved woman. So how far into a minefield you want to go with that is up to you guys. So in late 1780, he's given command of the frigate Alliance, and this is the finest ship by far built by the Americans in the war, and but with a really nasty reputation. After the Bonhomme Richard is sunk in Jones's victory, he's given command of the alliance, and he's offended because he thought that the French would give him a squadron to command, not just another frigate. So he dilly-dallies, and his crew wants to get moving so that they can get paid on another cruise. And his second in command is a Frenchman named Pierre Landais. And he seems to be quite incompetent or petty as a captain. He fires into both the Bonhomme Richard and the Serapis during the Battle of Flamborough Head. He's also a deadly duelist with a reputation for dueling. So it's sort of if you took the deadly French nobleman from the story Scaramouche of the movie, this great duelist fencer, with Inspector Clouseau, and you have Pierre Landais. So Landais decides to take the alliance away from just without so much as a by your leave. He orders the ship sailed, and he sails back to America. The crew gets so frustrated with him that they mutiny on the Atlantic. So the ship lands in Boston Harbor. The French captain released to insist that these men were mutineers and should be hanged. And so here's John Barry's diplomatic problem. He's going to take command of a ship named after the French and American alliance that's been manned by American sailors, but has been who have mutinied against the French captain. So he serves on this court-martial, and he navigates it as well as he navigated any ship in his life, you know, sailing between how far do I go with this and how far do I go with that. The American officers are reprimanded, and Landais is reprimanded with the recommendation to Congress that he not be given another American command, and he does not get one. So Barry's mission is to take John Laurens and Paine to France. They're going to plead for more money from the French government, from royalty, the Duc de Lausanne and Louis XVI. And Barry's forced to try to impress sailors, and he hates it, and he's getting a bad reputation for it, and he writes to Morris about it. Morris is like, what can you do? And again, he's forced to take, this time captured British sailors aboard. So they make the passage across the Atlantic. One night, they wind up being surrounded on three sides by icebergs. And the crew is like panicking, and they're taking anything they can, you know, spare spars to try to keep at bay. And Barry's navigating all through them. John Laurens uses Barry's head because the captain has his own head. And they get too close to an iceberg, and it starts slamming things down, and Laurens gets just out of the way because the ice shards destroy the head. And Thomas Paine is scared to death. He already had a lousy voyage to America back before the war. And there's a good story about that if you guys want, about Thomas Paine and Dr. Kearsley. But they land in Le Havre. Barry never goes to Paris to report to Franklin. He writes to him and says, this is what I need, this is what I need, this is what I need. And Franklin writes back, great to have you here. No, I don't have any money. I know you want to have the ship fitted with copper on your hull because that keeps the worms away, but we don't have the money for that. And Barry finally says, he's not going to be any help. I might as well sail back. On the way back, the British get together and they sign a round robin pledging that they will kill all of the Continental officers save one, and that one to get them back to England. Barry's informed of this by a Native American sailor. We don't know from what tribe. We can only assume that he might have been a Pequod or another of the New England tribes, because that's where he got to. but warned him about this happening. So Barry very quietly has the Marines, who are not British this time, on deck and everything else, and he's learned the names of the 3 ringleaders. The following morning, he pipes all hands, and they notice that the bosun has the cat o' nine tails out. He hangs these 3 men by their thumbs along their ratlins with their feet about 6 inches off the ground, and whips them until they start giving the names of their accomplices. And then they're all thrown in irons. It's the first of 3 mutinies Barry has to put up with. And
Excuse me, Tim, were the
yeah.
Marines mutineers?
No, these
No.
Marines were American.
They helped.
The British Marines were on the Raleigh.
Okay.
And Barry never says that they didn't fight, so they must have. But these guys, bad news. He's a couple hundred miles below Nova Scotia when he runs into 2 other British warships, the Atalanta and the Trepassey. One's pretty much a cruiser, neither are frigates, and the other's a sloop of war. So the other's about a leaner version of a brig. And they hail Barry to call his colors, lowers colors, and he says, "Perhaps I may after a trial." So everybody, general quarters, man your guns. Let's go to this. At that point, the wind dies. So Barry has no way of sailing his ship. The 2 British warships, though, have sweeps. They have oars, so they can row themselves into position. And they literally, here's the Alliance, and they row so they're right back on either side of the Alliance's stern and pound the big dickens out of it for 3 hours. Barry's on the quarterdeck directing things, the lighter cannons and the cannons in the stern. They can move them as best they can to try to return fire. When Barry's struck down by a grape shot, they're firing grape and canister now, they're that close. And he refuses to leave the quarterdeck until he's starting from loss of blood. He gets really lightheaded and they carry him below. The surgeon Kendall tends to him immediately. If any of you have seen the movie Master and Commander, they show how the surgeons treat wounds at sea. They spread sand on the floor to keep people from slipping into blood. Whatever rum, if they have no laudanum, they have rum to give. And holding the men down, they've used old sails to put on top of the that they're using. But Barry's second in command is a captain named Hoisted Hacker. He's from New England and one of the more unlucky captains. He's already lost 1 ship commanding it and lost another ship as second in command. He's buried, if you guys ever go up to Trinity Church, you'll find him around the corner from Alexander Hamilton. Hacker goes below deck and says, "We can't do this. I'm going to, ask for quarter." And Barry roars back, "No. If the ship cannot be defended without me, then I'm coming on board. Get the hell back up there and fight." So Hacker goes up and fight, and Barry's being dressed by Kendall, who says, "I have no business dressing you." He's right now. I'll go up myself. And just then the wind returns. And within 10 minutes of, being able to maneuver the Alliance, both the British ships strike after 2 broadsides apiece. The captain on the Trepassey is killed. The captain of the Atalanta, a fellow named Edwards, goes and surrenders and hands Barry a sword. And he says, "No, sir, you keep it. You've earned it." Barry and the Alliance sail back to Boston, where he recuperates for quite a while. But Sarah Barry comes up to join him, which is a nice turn of events. He's back to sea again in 1782, this time to take Lafayette to France to get money. And this time he has a kind of a mutiny by the crew, that they're upset that they're, and he has a significant amount of French hands who speak no English. And to his surprise, the French sailors are doing much better by him than the Americans are. They're upset about not getting paid. Ironically, Lafayette comes up with a solution. He goes to Paris, and then he sends a courier back with bags full of cash for Barry to be able to pay his men off. So that one is kind of calmed down. But most of them you leave to go on other American ships while Barry's waiting in dry dock for what's going to happen. And that's when he runs into his third mutiny, which is his officers. All except a couple of them say, we haven't been paid, we haven't done this. Matthew Park is his captain of Marines and has a very distinguished career with the Continental Navy. He fought on Bonhomme Richard with John Paul Jones. So Barry's able to get enough of a crew, and he's now gotten orders to sail down to Havana that they've sent one of the last ships left, ironically called the Duke de Luzon, down there with his best friend. Somebody have a question?
Looks like Jim does.
Oh, finish this and then I'll ask it.
Okay. With gold specie to come back for the United States. So he's down in Havana and he literally gets marooned there because the Spanish fleet's there and nobody's leaving till we leave. So Barry is able to, he was finally able to get the Alliance Copper Line. And so he is available to sail back and accompany the Duke de Luzon on her voyage up to Philadelphia. Off Cape Canaveral, they meet a small British squadron, and Barry picks a fight with the Captain Ogden, who's the commander of the British frigate Sybil. And after about a 3-hour battle, which is the last naval engagement of the Revolutionary War, the Sybil shears off. This happens in March, like March 9th and 10th of 1783, which is a couple of months after the Treaty of Paris ended the war. Barry comes back to the States. There's no Navy anymore. You want to ask your question now, Jim?
Yeah, real quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about what Barry and his people did when we were trying to get we were trying to set a date to ratify the Constitution?
Oh, sure. I'll get to that happily.
We also have a question from Richard.
Yeah, Richard. You're muted.
You're muted, Richard.
You're muted.
And now I'm not. This is a more general question, so I want Tim to finish his narrative, but I'd be interested in his insights into John Paul Jones, compared and contrast to John Barry. Both
Sure.
of them considered fathers of the American Navy.
Absolutely.
See them in a boxing match or something.
No, that's a good question for the end because it's pertinent. And again, it's pretty engaging because those two guys, they met each other maybe 2 or 3 times, but they had a huge amount of respect for each other. So we can jump into that.
Okay, great.
So here's Barry literally, stuck in Philadelphia along with the Continental sailors. They have not been paid. Inflation is something that is beyond our comprehension during the revolution from 78 on. Sometimes it's close to 100%. And Barry is so desperate for money because he's seeing his sailors on the waterfront begging, trying to see if a ship that's come in from Europe or from the Caribbean or the islands, the Antilles and so forth, can use a hand. So he goes to Wayne. He has an idea that he can buy his sailors shares for half price. Not that he wants to shaft them, but he wants to distribute the money as best as he can. And Wayne doesn't have the money either. So Barry gets a loan from one of the banks. And when it calls the loan, Barry again goes to Wayne saying, "Can you help me?" Wayne still doesn't have any money. So flash ahead to like 1787, when the year before, Barry's given a ship to build merchantman, the Asia, all set to go to China. He had gone out with the Asia right after the war with a hold full of tobacco. And somehow he rammed something when he was in Virginia. The pilot screwed things up, and the Alliance made it, but all of the tobacco was ruined. So Morris gives the first trip to China to John Green, another Philadelphian, who ironically was captaining the Duc de Lausanne in that last battle with the Sybil. And so Barry's now got his chance, but he's still going nuts without any money. Meanwhile, the Pennsylvania Assembly has seized the Austin Street Ferry for being a traitor, and they're trying, how are we going to pay our debts or pay our bills? So Barry's very interested because down the street from the shipyard, they're debating the Constitution. And when it's agreed upon on September 17th, the Pennsylvania Assembly goes upstairs to debate whether or not they should approve it. So the arguments go back and forth. There is a strong contingency of Western Pennsylvania assemblymen who want nothing to do with the federal government. You know, we have the Articles of Confederation. We fought because we didn't want a strong central government. This is what you want. There are two of these fellows. Millie's not much of a character. The real ringleader for all this is a guy named James McCalmont, who is a cross between Hawkeye from the Last of the Mohicans and Newt Gingrich. And he says that when they take a break for lunch, he says to them, if we don't go back to the State House, it's not Independence Hall yet, they can't pass a vote. They're going to be 2 votes shy. If we don't go, they've got to come up with 2 votes somewhere. So let's pack up and head home, which most of them do. And so when they come back, I think Thomas Fitzsimmons is the fellow that's presiding. And where's everybody? You know, they haven't come back. So when they sends the sergeant arms, and he goes, they're packing to leave. So later in the afternoon or evening, he comes back and, you know, Mifflin's a member of the assembly, and he goes, how many are left? And they say 2. And the 2 of them are McCalmont and Millie. They're staying in a tavern not too far from Independence Hall. So the morning session opens, and now Barry shows up in the gallery. The gallery isn't, there's never been a gallery over the top. They just roped it off, and the gallery basically was those people that were standing around the legislators listening to them debate. And Sergeant of Arms says, you know, I'll need men to do this. And Barry, very quietly, he's come in with wharf toughs, stevedores, you know, roughnecks of all sorts. And they go to the tavern. One account said that they found Millie in the outhouse. And they take these guys and Shanghai them back to the State House. I had my knee surgery in 2005 when I got in this part of the research, and I reached out to Carrie Dethorne, who I'm sure all or most of you know, is the director and curator at Independence Hall. And she let me take a yardstick and measure how wide how many steps, how wide is the landing, and everything else to figure out these wharf toughs carrying these guys who are not meekly going. They're gouging and kicking and screaming at each other, getting them up there and then throwing them into the assembly room. And then the door is locked. And they say, you have no right to do this. You have no right to do this. Well, we have every right to do this. You're supposed to serve the state, and you can't leave, and we want to have a vote. So they don't have to vote for it. They just have to make sure it's a quorum. So the vote is not to approve the Constitution. It's politics. The vote is for the Assembly to have a convention, the state convention, to approve the Constitution. So that's where it's going. A few nights later, Barry's having lunch with Charles Biddle, who's the Attorney General for Philadelphia, who informs him that Ben Franklin, who sadly noted to Robert Morris about Barry not doing what Franklin wanted him to do, that he was a great man, but bothered by small things. Barry issues the order for his arrest. Barry, to the Biddle. And Barry's going, WTF, man? I mean, geez, and he goes, I will issue the warrant for your arrest as soon as the Asia is halfway down the Delaware. So we can't arrest you. So then Barry goes on this voyage to China. There's some good stuff about China. How much of it do you guys want?
It's getting pretty late.
Okay.
Well, we're okay if anyone has to hop off, they're able to do that.
Well, I can finish with it, and then you guys want more in China. Those who want to stay, I can fill them in.
Okay.
How's that? It's a very successful voyage with the Asia, which allows him to, as they call it, swallow the anchor. He has bought a estate or plantation, and what's now pretty much Frankfurt. It was called Northern Liberties back then, which he calls Strawberry Hill. The irony of that is the alliance is no longer seaworthy. So Robert Morris sails her north and then sails her down south and beaches her on Petty's Island. For the rest of his life, John Barry can watch the Delaware River and the elements dismember the frigate he so wonderfully led and fought aboard. The deprivations of the Barbary pirates and the issues with the British Crown and the French Revolution and things going back and forth. Knox and Washington have been talking about, do we finally get a Navy? Because we need to protect our ships in the Mediterranean and so forth. And they start talking to Barry about it. He gives them ideas. They bring in Joshua Humphreys. And in 1794, Barry's given the first commission of the United States Navy as captain of the frigate United States, which is built here in Philadelphia. It is a sister ship of the Constitution. So when you're up in Boston aboard the Constitution, you're also aboard the United States. The only thing Barry did was a couple of years into it, he added a roundhouse to it, which nobody can figure out why, but he did nonetheless. The launching of the United States in 1797 was like the Eagles Super Bowl parade. People were on the rooftops. They started climbing on places where they could see it all, roofs and posts and everything else the night before. And she's launched with great fanfare. Unfortunately, she goes down the waves too fast and hits the bottom too hard, and she needs repairs afterwards. But Barry takes her to sea during the Quasi-War with France. He is not the hero of the Quasi-War. Thomas Truxton is, his good friend, who is the only who encounters two French ships, a privateer and a French ship that he defeats, and he's given a gold medal for his troubles by Congress. Jones got a gold medal during the Revolution. Barry never got one, but never said anything about it. Barry makes some captures and has some decent cruising. But what he really does, and the important thing is, he turns the United States frigate into the first U.S. military academy. Among his midshipmen and his lieutenants are Richard Summers of Summers Point, who some of you might know got blown up when they burned the frigate Philadelphia in Tripoli. Stephen Decatur, who was expelled from Episcopal Academy and went on to serve the country with great courage and skill during the War of 1812. Ironically, aboard the United States at one point, and also he was commander of another frigate, and probably would have been a presidential candidate if he hadn't fought a duel with another person that was aboard the United States, Charles Barron, who later who's the commander of the Chesapeake when she's captured during the Leopard Affair. And Charles Stewart, who becomes the captain of the Constitution, and in the latter year of the War of 1812, has a couple of prizes. He captures it once. And his grandfather, for you Irishmen, he's the grandfather of Charles Stewart Parnell, the great British or Irish politician during the Victorian years. Barry has fought asthma all his life. He is a devoted friend of Benjamin Rush, whose words lie on Barry's tombstone. Thomas Jefferson asks him to take a squadron to the Mediterranean in 1802, and by now he's just debilitated. On one of his voyages on the United States, they're in Portugal, and he goes with his crew up a hill. And when he gets to the hill, he collapses, and they really think he's going to die here. And he's well enough eventually to come down. But my wife ironically, had asthma all her life till she had a bilateral lung transplant 5 years ago. So the first thing my daughter said to her was, well, you don't have asthma now. But he died, and Rush did all sorts of the treatments for asthma back then that there were. Mustard poultices, smoking cigars, the same sort of things that Teddy Roosevelt's father's doctors tried to do for young Teddy. They were still doing enemas and the whole like of things. He died on September 13th, 1803. It was a huge service, and all of Philadelphia turned out. You all know about the statue being constructed, I think 1907, was it? And he kind of was being forgotten for quite a while. But in the last 20 years or so, the Navy has done great things. There have been destroyers named after him. And he's honored on both sides of the aisle. President Kennedy dedicated laid a wreath at the statue that was built while Eisenhower was president over in Wexford. And it's interesting, Barry's cutlass hung in the Oval Office while President Kennedy and his cabinet deliberated on how to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis 63 Octobers ago. It sort of bore silent witness as Kennedy and Admiral Anderson did just what Washington and Barry envisioned the Navy to be able to do. And then another World War II naval hero, George H.W. Bush, had Stewart's painting hanging in the White House during his administration when he resolved the issues with Kuwait and the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Where was Strawberry Hill? You said Fishtown or Northern Liberties?
No, more like they called it Northern Liberties because it extended, but really closer to Frankfurt because like the creek ran through his estate.
Like Bridesburg, maybe?
Yeah, it could be up that way. I never quite was able to get from the city the parameters of where it was.
Okay.
So
It wasn't Strawberry Mansion.
No, but a lot of people I say Strawberry Hill, and they think, oh my God, he was right off the Schuylkill. No, not that Strawberry.
Okay.
So Tim, I don't want you to leave or we get back into a pizza debate before you answer my question about John Paul Jones and Barry.
All right, I'll answer that second because I did want to get into it. I don't know if Kathy's got to leave, but I did want to get into Sarah Barry, if you guys would like.
Sure.
Because she really deserves to be talked about here. There's, Father of the American Navy. Is it John Barry? Is it John Paul Jones? Is it George Washington, who rented ships while he was in Boston during the siege of Boston? Is it John Adams, who literally gave birth to the Continental Navy and then was the first president to use the United States Navy? Well, no matter who you pick for the father of the American Navy, the mother of the American Navy is hands down Sarah Barry. They never had any children. They adopted two of Barry's nephews, one of whom died at sea. The other went with Barry to China and became quite a successful ship's captain and merchantman in his own right, Patrick Hayes. His papers are also in Seaport Museum. And if you guys ever get possessed that you really want to learn how to curse colorfully, get into some of his letters because he is the Michelangelo or the Michael Jordan of cussing. I mean, he can put one four-letter word with it. God, why didn't we think of that? But Sarah is remarkable. She made sure he had as stable a time at home as possible. She was very gracious. She was a stitch sister of Betsy Ross, and one of her flags flew on Jones's ship, the Ranger, which was the first American ship to get an official salute in France. I don't believe it's the same flag that he flew aboard the Bonhomme Richard or Reliance. She was just a terrific lady and a class act. Her letters, there's not many, they're at Haverford College. He would write letters to her, and we don't really have any more than I think one or two I found in, I think, New York. But he's always talking about, well, this didn't go right and that didn't go right. They're written towards the ones we have are written 1790s. But she's always very philosophical about, I'm sure all this will work out. He writes to her, my dear wife, my dear Sarah. She always, her salutation is my dear life. And there's one lovely letter written late in their marriage when he's about to return, bringing the United States up the Potomac. And at the end, she says, you know, I just wish for a few months of your presence and kind consideration. And she signs the letter, composed in candlelight, but without spectacles. I don't think I'll ever see somebody's letter in my life that's going to have a finer closing than that. And after he died, she moved back to Philadelphia. And naval officers not only made it a tradition, but wanted to come and see her. And she always brought out a tea cart that that she had made, and entertained with tea and talking and listened to their stories about where they'd been and the girls that they're seeing or getting married or how things are going. The tea cart was built from the deck of the Alliance. And she died in 1831. Another word about the Austen family. Isaac died, they stayed friends. William Austen wound up going to New York after the failed expedition was captured. Barry reached out to Washington and said, could you intercede on my brother-in-law's behalf and get him released? He made sure not to tell him, by the way, he was commanding a ship that went up the Chesapeake to burn Mount Vernon. He left that part out. And Washington wrote back, I would love to do so, but I don't do that. William Austen wrote to him from Nova Scotia while he was there for a couple of years, and then he went to England. And while Sarah didn't want anything to do with him, Isaac, while he was alive, didn't want anything to do with him. Barry wrote to him, my dear brother, is how his salutation for William Austen. William Austen's was my dear Barry. And in one letter, he wrote to Austen saying, hey, I hear there's some good books over in England, including this one called Tom Jones. Can you send me copies of them? But make sure you give them to the captain so I don't have to pay any duties on them. And then over in the Barry papers, there's a letter from 1811, 8 years after Barry died, from William Austen to Sarah. And he says, you know, I haven't spoken or communicated with you years. I now live in Charleston and I'm in destitution. I was promised $500 in Isaac's will that was never given to me. I respectfully request that you send it. And she did send a check, but he died before it got there. When we talk about America being, the revolution being our first civil war, I think John Barry and the Austens prove how accurate that is. And at the same time, the fact that he would be the one of the three of them to stay in touch with this man who was diametrically opposed to everything Barry fought and almost died for, and would still have that kind of consideration. You know, it's that kind of judgment of a person by their character and not their politics. And I can't think of a better way to end a tour in Barry if I was a guide.
John, Tim, I'd like to point out to the audience that in your book, beginning on page 111 through 114, that's where Sarah's life is described. Much of what you mentioned there, so that the audience can go and read that. Pages 111 through 114. Lots of interesting ties. I didn't know any of that until I read this recently.
Yeah, they had a
Tied to
few.
the early flags. She's tied to some of the first families from the old Swedes. A very interesting set of
Oh,
pages
yeah.
there.
She's a neat
I had
lady.
not considered her as the mother of the U.S. Navy. I like that, and I
Oh,
plan to
she
use
is.
that.
She absolutely is. Did Kathy jump off?
No, I'm
No,
still
she's
here.
there.
Oh, okay. Do you have any questions, Kathy, about anything?
Well, you answered my one question, but I have another, and that is, Richard also raised the same question. Let's talk for a minute or two about who is the founder of the Navy. There are three candidates at least.
Yep. The father of the American Navy. The case could be made for John Paul Jones
Right.
because of the fact that he, like I said, he was his own press agent, and he wrote volumes about how to improve the Navy. It wasn't that he knew more than Barry did. But you know, when they talk about a Napoleonic complex or something like that, that I've got to prove I'm more than I am, that's him. He was reprimanded once by Benjamin Franklin for deserting the alliance and saying, that was your ship and you let this jackass take it, and now you want a squadron? I don't think so. And Franklin loved him. But Jones, because of Flamborough Head, because he's a much bigger name, gets a lot of consideration for that. He is buried, I don't know if any of you have been to Annapolis, Indianapolis Chapel, but he's buried downstairs and in a catafalque of dolphins that's,
It's
holding him.
incredible. It's incredible.
And the sword that that Jones was given by the king, that was given to Barry, and Barry gave it to Richard Dale after he left, retired, is there along with some other things. But he's buried all alone. Ironically, Barry's Bible is frequently at the altar upstairs. Sometimes they don't use it, but most of the time it's there. So that's where Jones is buried. Where's Barry buried? He's
St.
buried
Mary's.
among his friends, his wives, his nephew, the Biddles, the Bouviers that later were affiliated with Jacqueline Bouvier and the Kennedys, Fitzsimons, all of these people that Barry knew and worked with and loved a great deal. He's buried among his friends. Jones isn't. So John Adams should get a lot of recognition because he gave birth to this Navy, and he worked incessantly for it. And he called starting the Continental Navy my finest time in Congress. That was the most important, and I thought I did other important things, but this is one I'm the most happiest about. And yet, when the Continental Navy, which over the course of time had 57 ships, and by the time Barry left France to meet the only others, there were only two, Adams did write, "It is difficult to think of our Navy without tears." So much can be said for that. But let's go back to our guy.
Yeah, but there's one more. There's the man who built the 6 frigates.
Oh, Joshua Humphreys.
Yes, so he's
Yeah.
he's
Yeah,
a
you know what?
candidate.
Nobody ever said that, and you're right. I mean, here's this Quaker, and it always cracks me up that his little placard in Havertown is spelled wrong.
Yeah.
There's some of his designs are in the Historical Society, his papers and what he was doing and working on. There's a wonderful scene, and it's also in one of the Patrick O'Brien books in Master and Commander, where they're toying this carpenter from Boston. He was there for a wedding, and he just did a model of the enemy ship, the French privateer, and it's the Constitution. They went down to Savannah and to Jekyll's Island because that's where all the live oak was. Men died down there to build the new frigates for the United States Navy. Barry went down there twice. you know, all of the different things they tried to do, but it was his design that made Old Ironsides Old Ironsides. So that's a really good point. And I'm going to steal that one from you, David. I have to do Richard, I'm sorry. I have to speak at the Sons of the Cincinnati Friday night. The good news is it's at the Moshulu, so the food's going to be good,
Cool.
and I don't have to pay for it. It's my daughter's favorite place, you know. So every once a year, if she's down, I treat her, and every year I find out it's $30 a plate more. But he is. Washington confides in him. What do we need? How do we need to do this? Knox defers to him in the correspondence about the building.
Which he are you talking about?
Barry.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
So, but I think it's really hard to dislodge him from that title. There were a couple of other captains who served in both the Continental Navy and the United States Navy. The commander of the Constitution drives Barry crazy while the frigates are being built, because he's not reporting back, oh, we had trouble with the keelson. Oh, we didn't get the live oak we were promised. Oh, the masts are faulty. He's going, when do we get our uniforms? Then 6 months later, dear Commodore, this is, you know, things are going okay. When do we get our uniforms? And there literally is a correspondence, and I'm paraphrasing, where he says, would you stop worrying about the uniforms and worry about your ship? But there's Barry's crews, the whole pretty much loved him. There's a great fellow, John Kessler, who's buried in Mount Laurel, who served with Barry on the Delaware and the Alliance. And his reminiscences are wonderful. They're wonderful to read. He spoke about that when his sailors were happy, he was happy. And there was a line, if somebody said we should do this or so-and-so, and Barry heard it, I think we should do this or that Barry would say, who gives you the right to think? So after a while, the crew said, when somebody said that, and they'd say, who gives you the right to think? One guy said, after all, Barry thinks for all of us. And he turned around and there was Barry, and he didn't say a word, according to Kessler, for about a minute or two to let the guy start quaking in his boots or worse before he broke into laughter himself. That's our guy. That's our guy.
So what's the criteria then for choosing who's the father of the Navy?
Whether you're Irish, Scottish, or a WASP comes into play.
Come on,
If
we've
you-
got visitors coming from all over the country,
Oh,
all
I
over the
know.
world. We have to be serious.
I would be, if I was speaking like you to a host of people, as you guys always do, and from other countries and from other
That's right.
backgrounds, I think I would say there's room enough for several people, and I would defer and include
Okay.
Joshua Humphreys. But I would say that, you know, the Navy's had resolutions over time that acknowledged him as the father of the American Navy. It's no loss of credit. I'm kind of vamping here, Kathy, because I wanted to write by you, since you're obviously the smartest of the bunch of us. I would say, you know, there are strong arguments that could be made for Jones and Humphreys and Adams, but the fact that he served in both navies, was a confidant of Washington's and Knox's, and oversaw the building of the first 6 frigate, the original 6 frigates. Only 4 were built while he was in the service. They deferred and built a couple of other ships.
Well,
And the fact
he came up with the signal system too.
he came up with the signals, I was going to say he wrote this, did the signal system for the Navy. And he also, as I said, made his ship a floating naval academy. You know,
Right.
those men that left to fight or to take over warships of their own, frigates of their own back in those days, all distinguished themselves with the exception of poor Charles Barron, who just had a lot of bad luck.
But also, as Philadelphia tour guides, he's buried here. So that makes
Yeah.
him the most
He's-
important.
Yeah,
Well,
but
of
now
course.
can I diverse on something completely different for 2 minutes? And
Sure.
its initials are Gustavus Cunningham.
Yes, please do. Yes.
Do you give him his due when you guys are touring?
I do.
And
No, we know
he's over in
nothing.
St.
Most of
Peter.
us know nothing about him.
All right,
Who?
another guy who's
Who?
Philadelphia. He's Black Irish from Northern Ireland. Uh, Again, married into a family that has a pew, the Hockleys in Christchurch. And he goes over right when the war starts and is trying to get some gunpowder from Holland. Doesn't work out so well. And he winds up going to Dunkirk, where he purchases a well, I'm 74. I'm showing my age from talking so much. What the hell's the classification of his two ships? Cutter. Like a cutter's about the half the size, maybe half of a frigate. And he has the Surprise is his best known one. And he sails, he doesn't come back home until 1779. As briefly as possible, this man sailing the North Sea and the English Channel captured, burned, or sunk more British ships than John Paul Jones, John Barry, and Nicholas Biddle combined. At
Wow.
least 60.
Wow.
And there was Lord Stormont, and if there was anyone that George III would like to hang as much, if not more so, than Franklin and Washington, it's Gustavus Cunningham. He finally leaves and goes and gets a privateer stateside, and he's outside of New York when he's overrun by two ships, and he said their teeth were just too big. They weigh him down with chains, 50 pounds of chains, and send him back. And since his captain's commission was confiscated by the French and he never got it back, issued by Ben Franklin, signed by John Hancock, they're going to hang him. And when Washington hears this, he lets the British know, you hang Gustavus Cunningham, and I will hang 6 British officers upon hearing this. So they sent him to Mill Prison in Plymouth. He engineers a great escape of 50 Americans. The only thing missing is Steve McQueen and a motorcycle,
Wow.
and gets them safely back to France. He goes back to sea and he gets captured again and sent back to Mill Prison. And his wife, Anne Hockley Cunningham, is 24 years old. And she writes to Franklin that she is crossing the Atlantic. Her family is merchants. So she crosses by herself, leaving her children to go to Paris. And she says, I'm going to come and beg for my husband's, life. He escapes again, gets back to France. He doesn't serve anymore in the Continental Navy. He is never paid for everything he did because he doesn't have his captain's commission. And yet he has a privateer in the quasi-war with France, and he's like 70 something when the War of 1812 breaks out. And he says, give me a ship. Come on, let's go. I want to fight him again. And he's buried over in St. Peter's. And I was surprised that Samuel Francis is buried over there. And Stephen Decatur's father is buried over there, who was a privateer and whose ship got captured, and one of the sailors on his ship was a fellow named James Fortin. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, the way these guys are all interconnected. It's like Larry Boa. He's a manager of the Phillies, then he's a coach of the Dodgers, then he's, a recruiting scout for the Cubs, and now he's back here. They're all like this. But Cunningham never gets the credit he's due. And
He's buried at St. Pete's?
yeah.
Along with
Jim?
Decatur, Stephen, the son, is buried there too.
No, Decatur the son's buried down in Maryland. Decatur the father's buried at.
That's who has the obelisk? I thought that was the son.
No, he was
Oh.
a very successful Navy captain. Was a privateer. And his ship got captured. When his ship, James Fortin, was one of his sailors.
Wow. I
That's
got
when
that
Fortin got
confused.
cancer.
Wow.
I thought that was the father, the son. I thought that was the son.
Yeah, I thought it was the son too.
I think it's the father. Pretty sure. You know what? I'll double check and make sure. But I know when I went over
Okay.
there around 2000, because I think Decatur's buried in Maryland someplace.
I thought they brought his body up from Maryland.
Maybe.
Because I've been telling people that was the son who
Me
was
too.
the one who went over to beat the Barbary Coast Pirates.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll double check on that because I really thought that Stephen Decatur Sr. is the guy. Stephen Decatur Jr. was expelled from Episcopal Academy. He
No,
was
I just looked it up. It said Junior is at St. Peter's Episcopal
very
Churchyard,
good.
Philadelphia.
Okay,
All right.
well then I stand corrected because I was over there and remembered it when I went over there in 2006. But then I guess and I apologize. I should know that. But
I was going to
What?
I thought,
reread my book. I was going to go, man, I got that wrong.
It's the biggest marker in the whole place.
yeah. Well, what's the date on it? When he died? Can you see it?
Yeah. Oh, well. No, I'm just looking. I got 1820, March 22nd, 1820.
That's when he was buried. That's when he was killed.
That's
He
when
was
he
killed.
died.
He was killed in a duel, so that's him. Now, why don't we do more about that? I'm not saying to you guys, I'm just saying us collectively as Americans or Philadelphians.
There's so much naval history that is under the radar.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what you just told me about Cunningham, I knew nothing about him. It's there.
Yeah, when
I
we
knew
did
zero. I knew zero.
when we did the book Give Me a Fast Ship, and I'm spoiling the ending of it, I fell in love with him. And the fact that he was again another Philadelphian, and again, like Barry, he's got this remarkable wife who says, I'm going to go free my husband. And Frank, no, 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 we'll try to do our best. No, you had your chance the first time. And so forth. But it's just Nicholas Biddle. I mean, my God, he would have been the top. He would be the father of the Navy. He'd survived his battle with the Randolph, except that the ship blew up. And at one point in his younger days as a member of the British Navy, he went on a voyage got to Spitsbergen to explore where the North Pole was. And one of his messmates and friends was Horatio Nelson.
Oh, wow.
So, and
Timothy
Biddle,
Timothy Matlack's son Mordecai was on that ship with Nicholas Biddle. He was on the Randolph that blew up.
yep, when the Randolph, there are only 4 people. It's almost like a Coleridge poem. Only 4 people they found that were alive on the plank.
Amazing.
But I stand corrected. I always thought it was Stephen Decatur Sr. because I know he was killed. The duel was down off off the Potomac because he lived across the street from the White House, and there was serious talk about him being considered a presidential candidate. Like, well, yeah, he's a hero and he's very involved in Washington affairs and everything like that.
I think
Tim,
Legault-
if you only had 3 topics what 3 topics would you keep in mind to share with visitors if you were standing at the statue talking to visitors?
You know what? I'll take a cue from Kathy, and I would gauge that on what crowd you're talking to.
Yep.
Okay.
If they're local, I would certainly bring up Turtle Gut Inlet because half of them will have been to Wildwood, and the biggest question will be whether they go to Max or Sam's. With that, I would have and the Delaware too. His escapades on the Delaware with Lane, and then I would certainly bring up the Alliance. I would certainly measure. I'm not trying to tell you guys what to do, but I would definitely make sure that Sarah gets a sentence or two in Edgewise about how remarkable she was. And the fact that he married into a family that was split by the war, and what it cost them. If I was talking to people coming from England or elsewhere, I would probably do a more general, here's what he did here in Philadelphia. I'd certainly focus on getting those points across, maybe not as much detail, and then his voyages on the Alliance, and also the United States frigate, his first being first captain of the United States Navy.
Yeah,
Um,
but the English didn't like him, so that would be a slippery slope or
Not
thin
so,
ice.
not so. We did not mention that it was probably William Austin, but the British offered him 20,000 guineas and a
Okay, well, yeah,
command of a
later in
Royal
life.
Navy frigate. Well, no, he actually meets a couple of guys, and it's in the book. I think one guy's name is ironically, I don't know if it's Kelly or not, but the two captains leave Barry on their visit, and one says, "Adieu, my fellow countrymen." And Barry goes, "I don't think so. I'm an American. I'm not an Englishman." He goes, "But you're like me. You're an Irishman."
Well,
And
I was just thinking about why he even came here, because how awful
oh
they were
yeah,
treated.
oh yeah, he
Yeah.
bore no love to the crown. That's for sure. And the other thing, and something else, Kathy, to mention, if you get a contingency of Irish, which with the Navy coming in, you're liable to find, especially if they're naval guys from the Ancient Order of Hibernians or Friendly Sons. He kept in touch with his family in Wexford, sent money to them all his life. When his sister died, uh, and his brother-in-law died, he sent two of them. He sent for the two boys, Michael and Patrick Hayes, to come live with him. Patrick Hayes writes an amazing journal on the voyage to China that's at the Seaport Museum. A lot of this is also online because the Falvey Library at Villanova digitized a lot of Barry's papers. So you can always go to them for
Did they?
reference. Uh, but but yeah, you've got a wealth of things to choose from. And but there's one thing I've learned from going places and watching, guides, take you where you didn't think you would go in the mind with how much they knew and what they could tell you that when, how come I don't know that, sort of thing. I would say I hope I've given you guys enough, and however you tell his story, however you pick it, is darn fine with me because you're telling his story, and what you choose to include in that to wow the crowd and get them impressed is great. I don't know how many times, and I'm sure you've done the same. You're back there, on a nice summer day, spring day, and the crowds come, and the cameras or the phones now come out, and all of a sudden, who is Barry? Who the heck
Yep.
is this guy? My son and I did a children's book uh, on him for the Port Authority because they did a book on each and every bridge. So write a book about him. So I was like this, and I said to my son, who's a very talented artist, he worked for years as a freelance illustrator with the New York Times and Condé Nast and magazines all over the world. And he's a fine artist too. He's a very good painter, but he also is an art director. And I wanted him to do the illustrations. And I said, this sounds like Parson Weems. It sounds like Barry's father's going to say, why did you cut why did you pull out all the four-leaf clovers, John? There won't be a cherry tree over there. So he said, well, let's do something different. So we were brainstorming and we said, let's have a tour of school kids come to the statue, and the rest of the kids have gone back with the teacher. And the statue comes to life and takes them on a sailboat down to Delaware. So that's exactly what we did. And then Ted said, and the only problem is he can't move his arm. So then we got the idea when he talked about Richard Weeks dying at Turtle Gut Inlet that the arm dropped for a minute. But he did such a great job with the illustrations. I don't know where they are now, but for years at the Port Authority's offices, corporate office in Camden, they had them hanging down the thing. But it was a lot of fun to do that. I'll send one to Jim and send something, or send a couple of you guys way if you have any children or grandkids you think would be interested. You got to
Some of us
remember.
have great grandkids.
Well, then, you know what, Kathy, I'll tell you what. Give Jim your address and I'll send you a couple.
Thank you. That would be lovely. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks for keeping me on my toes tonight. Are there any other questions?
Well,
Thank
just
you.
if you can
Thank
do
you.
it short, if you can do it quickly, he was not loved by all. John Adams didn't seem to like him, and Stoddard didn't seem to like
Oh,
him.
no. Well, Adams liked him when he was in Continental Congress. In fact, he's praising him. And Abigail Adams writes back to him that your friend Barry is now in command of the Alliance. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but they, you know, the John Barry that takes the United States out to sea and the John Barry that 20 years before was taking Continental Navy ships out to fight the British are two different men. The asthma has really debilitated him. He was a member of the Society of the Deceased Captains and their Widows and Orphans in Distress, or what did they call it? The Sea Captains Club. And I'm sure that thanks to the City Tavern and other establishments, when you look at Gilbert Stuart's painting, it's almost like Ted Williams or John Wayne, when you see early pictures of these tall guys and they're thin as a rail, but then by the time they're in their 40s, they're built like they've had some good meals. And the Gilbert Stuart painting certainly shows that. But Stoddard doesn't like him because he hasn't done what Truxtun did. He didn't go down and capture the whole French fleet. And he writes back to Adams, Barry is old and infirm. And it's a cruel thing to say, but you can understand why first secretary of the Navy, who's got all these pressures for the ships to produce, might have felt like that. And Adams agrees with him, like, you know, well, what the hell? And yet Jefferson thought well enough of him to say, he's the guy I want to go to the Mediterranean, you know, when he's elected president. But the interesting thing about Stoddard is that on his last voyage or next to last voyage, Stoddard writes to him and says, I would appreciate it if you would take my son as a midshipman.
Oh,
I think he would benefit greatly from, and it's in the book, I think he would
Right.
benefit greatly from your expertise and your knowledge and how to be a man. You know, I'm paraphrasing again, but it's a really wonderful letter. And you really read it and go, is this the same SOB that's saying, oh, this fat old guy can't do anything? You know?
okay. All right.
All
Thank you,
righty.
Tim.
One last thing. If any of you have any questions, you got two options. You can go to Jim and ask him for yourselves. Jim has my phone number. You guys can call me anytime. If there's anything I can do to help what you guys are doing. And finally, last but not least, from one lifetime citizen of the Delaware Valley who loves Philadelphia to death, thank you all so very much for what you're doing. And as Butch Cassidy said to Woodcock in the train, they ain't paying you enough.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a real honor to hear from you.
Right back at you anytime.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you
Wish you
so
all
much.
all the best this coming week and further, and a wonderful holiday season coming ahead.
It all starts Thursday.
You got it, man. Good luck.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Tim. You were great.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Thanks
Thank you
very much.
Bye.
We'll see you.
Good night, everyone.